When a racist waitress gives poor service to a black woman on purpose, she never expected to turn around and see the owner of the restaurant standing behind her and then say a single line that sends her into shock. "What did you just say to my mother?" Once you have finished the video, please share in the comments if you have ever experienced something like this. Angela Harris stepped into the restaurant, her heels clicking softly against the polished hardwood floor. The upscale eatery buzzed with quiet sophistication, soft lighting, the clinking of glasses, and the hum of conversation blending into a soothing ambiance. She couldn't help but smile as she took in the atmosphere. This was her son Chris's pride and joy, the culmination of years of hard work and determination. Tonight, Angela was here to celebrate both her own milestone and her son's success. Chris had insisted she come by for dinner, promising to join her later for dessert after checking on the kitchen and operations. True to his humble nature, he rarely mentioned he was the owner, preferring to observe the restaurant's flow anonymously. Angela admired that about him. "Table for one?" the hostess asked, her smile polite and welcoming. "Yes, but I'm meeting someone later," Angela replied. "I'll start on my own. Right this way." The hostess led her to a table near the window, where the view of the city lights added to the restaurant's charm. Angela settled into her seat, smoothing her navy blue dress as she glanced at the menu. She felt a sense of pride imagining Chris working behind the scenes, ensuring everything was perfect. Moments later, a waitress approached. Mid-30s, with a sharp expression and stiff posture, she didn't carry the same warmth as the rest of the staff. "Water?" she asked curtly, not even making eye contact. "Yes, please," Angela said, offering a polite smile. The waitress returned with a glass, setting it down with a clunk. Angela hesitated, slightly put off by the abruptness but unwilling to jump to conclusions. "Thank you," she said warmly. The waitress didn't respond, instead pulling out her notepad. "Ready to order?" Angela nodded. "I'll start with the house salad, and then have the grilled salmon." The waitress scribbled the order down and turned away without a word. Angela frowned, watching her walk toward another table where she greeted the diners with a bright smile and lively conversation. Shaking her head, Angela dismissed the moment, reminding herself she was here to celebrate. Still, a faint unease lingered. She sipped her water and waited, her appetite and excitement slightly dimmed. Angela sat at her table, her fingers lightly tapping the edge of her water glass. It had been nearly 20 minutes since her salad plate had been cleared, and there was still no sign of her main course. She glanced at her phone to check the time, a small frown tugging at her lips. Her patience was beginning to wear thin. Looking around the dining room, Angela observed the steady flow of service. A young couple seated nearby had arrived long after she did. Yet, they were already being served their entrees, delivered by a cheerful server who placed their plates down with a flourish. The server lingered, chatting with the couple briefly before refilling their glasses. Angela's stomach tightened as she noted the contrast. She turned her gaze toward the kitchen, hoping to catch sight of Emily emerging with her plate. Instead, she saw the waitress leaning casually against a counter near another table, laughing at something one of the diners had said. Emily's relaxed posture and animated gestures suggested she wasn't in any hurry to attend to Angela's table. After a few more minutes, Angela raised her hand to catch Emily's attention. The waitress hesitated, rolling her eyes before finally approaching with a forced smile. "Yes?" she asked, her tone clipped. Angela kept her voice polite but firm. "I've been waiting for my entree for quite some time now. Could you check on it, please?" Emily shrugged, her expression indifferent. "The kitchen's busy. It'll be out when it's ready." Angela tilted her head slightly, her patience thinning but her composure intact. "I understand the kitchen can be busy, but I've noticed other tables that arrived after me have already been served." Emily's lips twitched into a thin smirk. "Well, maybe they didn't order something complicated like salmon. You know that takes a while, right?" Angela's gaze didn't waver. "I'm fairly certain salmon doesn't take 30 minutes to prepare. I'd appreciate it if you could follow up directly." Emily let out an exaggerated sigh, her body language radiating annoyance. "Fine, I'll check." She spun on her heel and walked off without another word, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Angela watched her disappear toward the kitchen, her frustration mounting. The interaction had left a sour taste in her mouth, overshadowing her excitement for the evening. Across the room, another server approached a table with a basket of warm bread, chatting warmly with the diners as they laughed and thanked her. The contrast stung more than Angela wanted to admit. Several more minutes passed before Emily reappeared, still without Angela's plate. Her expression was one of irritation, as though Angela's request had been an enormous inconvenience. "Well?" Angela asked calmly. Emily crossed her arms. "Your food's still not ready," she said, her voice laced with sarcasm. "Like I said, salmon takes time." Angela leaned forward slightly, her voice steady but firm. "And like I said, other tables that ordered after me have already been served. Can you explain why that is?" Emily blinked, her smirk faltering for a moment before she recovered. "Maybe they didn't sit here nitpicking every little thing," she snapped. "I'm doing my job." Angela took a steadying breath, her stomach tightening. "I think your job involves providing the same level of service to all your customers," she replied. "If there's an issue with my order, I'd appreciate some transparency rather than excuses." Emily's eyes narrowed, and she let out a harsh laugh. "Look, I'll tell the kitchen you're upset, but it's not like that's going to speed things up. Maybe you should relax." Angela stared at her for a long moment, weighing her next words carefully. "Perhaps you should consider how your tone and attitude reflect on this establishment," she said, her voice measured. "I'm here to enjoy my evening, not to engage in a back and forth about basic service." Emily's cheeks flushed slightly, but she doubled down. "I'll go check." "Again," she said sharply, before storming off. As Angela watched her retreat, she felt a simmering anger she hadn't expected. This wasn't just a case of poor service. It was deliberate, targeted, and deeply disrespectful. She glanced around the restaurant, noting how other diners continued to enjoy the attentive care that Emily seemed determined to withhold from her. Angela took a deep breath, silently reminding herself why she was here. This restaurant was her son's pride and joy, a symbol of everything he had worked so hard to build. But as much as she wanted to focus on that, she couldn't ignore the growing disrespect she was experiencing. Across the room, she caught a brief glimpse of Chris emerging from the kitchen. His gaze scanned the dining room, sharp and focused. Angela didn't wave him over. She wanted to handle this herself for now, but she silently hoped he'd notice the tension brewing at her table. Angela shifted in her chair, her patience wearing thinner by the second. Her water glass, still half empty, had grown tepid, and her stomach churned with hunger and irritation. It had been nearly an hour since she placed her order, and her waitress, Emily, had yet to provide anything resembling adequate service. Across the room, other tables buzzed with warm interactions between diners and attentive servers. Angela's table felt like a glaring exception. Emily emerged from the kitchen, her gait slow and indifferent as she carried plates to another table. Angela raised her hand, determined to address the situation once and for all. Emily caught her gesture and hesitated, clearly debating whether to acknowledge it. Finally, with a huff, she approached. "What now?" Emily asked, her arms crossed and her tone dripping with impatience. Angela straightened in her chair, meeting her gaze directly. "I'd like to know why it's taken nearly an hour for my entree, when tables that arrived long after me have already been served." Emily let out a sharp laugh, loud enough to draw glances from nearby diners. "Maybe they don't make a fuss about every little thing." Angela's voice remained calm, though her chest tightened. "Asking for basic service isn't making a fuss." Emily's eyes narrowed, and her smirk returned. "You people always want to act like the world owes you something." Angela froze for a moment, her composure nearly slipping. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Emily replied, her voice lower now, almost conspiratorial. "Some of us work hard for what we have. Others just expect it handed to them." Angela felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she refused to let Emily see her flinch. "I'm here to enjoy a meal, not to be judged by someone who can't even do her job properly." Emily scoffed. "Right, because it's my fault you're unhappy with everything." Angela inhaled deeply, holding her composure like a tightly wound string. "I'd like to speak to the manager." Emily's laugh this time was openly mocking. Of course you would. Let me guess, you're going to make this some big issue. I've seen it before. People like you, always so quick to call for help when things don't go your way. Angela's jaw tightened. And what, exactly, do you mean by people like me? Emily tilted her head, her smirk widening. You know exactly what I mean. Always complaining, always playing the victim. Honestly, if you don't like it here, maybe you should go somewhere that's more your speed. Angela's hands tightened around the napkin in her lap. My speed? She repeated, her voice low and even. Is that how you treat all your customers? Or just the ones you don't think deserve to be here? Emily shrugged. I treat everyone the same. Maybe you're just a little too sensitive. The words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. A few heads turned in Angela's direction as nearby diners began to notice the escalating tension. Angela glanced around, feeling the weight of their stares, but she refused to let the moment intimidate her. Let me be clear, Angela said, her tone measured but icy. Your behavior tonight has been unprofessional, disrespectful, and blatantly discriminatory. And it won't be ignored. Emily rolled her eyes. Oh, give me a break. It's not like I did anything wrong. You're just blowing this out of proportion because you're looking for something to be mad about. Angela stood up slightly in her chair, her voice rising just enough to command attention without shouting. I've been patient and polite, but you've gone out of your way to insult me, delay my service, and treat me like I don't belong here. If you think I'm going to sit back and accept that, you're mistaken. Emily's expression shifted slightly, her confidence wavering as the room grew quieter. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. Oh, sure. Make me the bad guy. Because that's what you people do best, right? Blame everyone else for your problems. Angela opened her mouth to respond. But before she could, a sharp voice cut through the air behind Emily. What's going on here? Angela turned her head, and her heart lifted slightly as she saw her son, Chris, standing a few feet away. His sharp gaze was fixed on Emily, his expression unreadable but tinged with a quiet intensity. His presence commanded immediate attention, and the tension in the room seemed to shift as diners turned their focus to him. Emily spun around, her face paling slightly as she realized who had spoken. Nothing, she stammered. Just a misunderstanding. Chris's eyes flicked to Angela, who gave him a calm but pointed look. Then back to Emily. I'd like to hear it from the customer, he said, his voice firm and steady. Angela sat back in her chair, a small wave of relief washing over her. It seems the waitress forgot to put in my order, then decided to compensate for her mistake by making it personal, she said evenly. Chris's jaw tightened, and he turned back to Emily, who now looked visibly uncomfortable. We'll handle this in my office. Now. Chris gestured firmly for Emily to step into his office, his tone brooking no argument. Angela followed silently, her calm demeanor a sharp contrast to Emily's stiff, defensive posture. Chris shut the door behind them and leaned against his desk, arms crossed, his sharp gaze fixed on Emily. Let's hear it, Chris began, his voice quiet but commanding. What happened out there? Emily crossed her arms, her eyes darting to Angela before settling back on Chris. Look, this is just a misunderstanding, she started, her tone clipped. She got upset because her food was taking a while. I tried to explain, but she kept pushing, and things got heated. Angela tilted her head slightly, her tone measured. Pushing? Asking about an order that wasn't even submitted isn't pushing. It's called basic accountability. Emily rolled her eyes, her lips curling into a smirk. See what I mean? She's impossible to please. I forgot to put the order in. It happens. But instead of being reasonable about it, she had to make a scene. Chris's voice was sharp. Making a scene? You mean asking for the service she should have received in the first place? Emily straightened, her cheeks reddening. I said it was a mistake. People forget things. It's not like I did it on purpose. Angela's calm tone cut through Emily's excuses. But you didn't stop there. You mocked me, made sarcastic comments, and decided to judge me instead of correcting your mistake. Emily turned toward Angela, her tone defensive. I wasn't judging you. You just kept acting like everything was my fault, like I did it on purpose to ruin your night." Angela leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady. "If forgetting the order was a mistake, your comments about people like me weren't." Emily's face flushed, her composure faltering. I didn't mean it like that." Chris's eyes narrowed. "Then explain exactly what you meant." Emily hesitated, her bravado cracking. "I don't know. It just came out. She kept pushing, and I just said something stupid, okay? It wasn't about her, specifically." Angela arched an eyebrow. "Not about me, specifically? Then why the comments about people like me always complaining, or about me not belonging here?" Emily's jaw tightened, and she glared at Angela. "You're twisting my words." Chris's tone dropped, ice lacing his words. "No one's twisting anything. I heard you out there. You didn't just forget her order. You treated her like she wasn't worth your time. And then you tried to justify it with comments that have no place in this restaurant. Or anywhere else." Emily flinched slightly, but crossed her arms tighter. "Oh, come on. You've worked in restaurants before, right? You know how some customers are. They just have to find something to complain about." Angela's voice sharpened. "So now it's my fault you disrespected me?" Emily's eyes darted between Angela and Chris, her frustration spilling over. "I didn't disrespect you. You just took everything I said the wrong way. Why is this such a big deal?" Chris leaned forward, his voice hard. "It's a big deal because you went out of your way to insult her. You didn't just make a mistake. You doubled down on it. And then you made it personal." Emily scoffed, her tone growing bitter. "Oh, so now I'm the villain? Because I didn't bend over backward for someone who came in here looking for problems?" Angela stood abruptly, her presence commanding. "I didn't come here looking for problems. I came here to celebrate and enjoy a meal at my son's restaurant. What I didn't expect was to be treated like I didn't belong." Emily's face paled. "Wait, your son?" Chris straightened, his expression cold. "Yes, my mother." Emily's mouth opened and closed, her bravado completely shattered. "I didn't know. I mean, if I'd known." "It shouldn't matter," Chris interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "Whether she's my mother, a regular customer, or someone walking in for the first time, everyone deserves respect. And you've made it painfully clear that you don't care about that." Emily stammered, her defenses crumbling. I wasn't thinking. Angela held up a hand, silencing her. "The issue isn't whether you were thinking. The issue is that you assumed you could treat me however you wanted without consequences." Emily clenched her fists, her tone turning desperate. "I've been here for years. I've worked harder than half the people out there, and you're going to throw me under the bus because I had a bad night?" Chris's tone remained cold. "This isn't about one bad night. I've had complaints about your attitude before, but I gave you the benefit of the doubt. Clearly, that was a mistake." Emily's voice rose, her frustration boiling over. "This is ridiculous. You're blowing this out of proportion just because she's your mom." Chris stepped forward, his gaze like steel. "This isn't about her being my mother. It's about you treating someone with blatant disrespect and then refusing to take responsibility for it." Emily opened her mouth to argue, but Chris held up a hand. "Enough. Take a break." "We're not done here." Emily huffed, her face red with anger, but she stormed out without another word, slamming the door behind her. Chris let out a heavy sigh, turning to Angela. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice tinged with frustration. "She's out of line, and I'll make sure this is addressed." Angela gave him a small smile. "I trust you will, but this isn't just about me. It's about the culture you want to build here." Chris nodded grimly, "And that culture doesn't include people like her." As the sound of the office door slamming faded, Chris stood still, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. Angela remained seated, her calm presence contrasting with the tension radiating from her son. She watched him carefully, recognizing the weight of his frustration. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," Chris finally said, his voice low but laced with anger. "She has no business talking to anyone like that, especially not here." Angela leaned forward slightly, her tone even. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but the question is, what are you going to do about it?" Chris exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I'm going to fire her. There's no question about that. After what I heard out there, she's done. Angela nodded, her expression thoughtful. I think that's the right call. But is she going to walk out of here understanding why? Chris's brow furrowed as he leaned against his desk. That's the part I'm stuck on. If I fire her on the spot, she's just going to leave here thinking I overreacted because it's personal. She'll blame me, blame you, and walk away feeling like a victim. Angela tilted her head slightly. So, what's the alternative? Chris straightened, his expression hardening. I want her to face what she's done first. I want her to understand exactly why her actions were unacceptable. Not just to me, but to everyone here. If she's going to leave, she's going to leave knowing the damage she caused. Angela's lips curved into a small smile. You want to teach her a lesson. Chris nodded firmly. Exactly. I'm going to call a staff meeting after the dinner rush. We're going to talk about what happened tonight. Her behavior, her comments, everything. She's going to hear firsthand from me, and maybe even her co-workers, why this can't be tolerated. Angela raised an eyebrow. That could get messy. Are you prepared for the fallout? Chris met her gaze, his voice steady. I am. If anyone has a problem with me standing up to this kind of behavior, they don't belong here either. I'd rather lose a few staff members than let this place become toxic. Angela leaned back, a note of approval in her expression. It's a bold move. But if anyone can pull it off, it's you. Chris let out a small, humorless laugh. You've always said I had a stubborn streak. Guess it's finally paying off. Angela smiled, but then grew serious again. Make sure you're clear about your message, Chris. This isn't just about firing her. It's about making it clear to everyone that this behavior is unacceptable, no matter who it's directed at. Chris nodded. That's exactly what I plan to do. This isn't about you being my mom. This is about the kind of restaurant I want to run. Everyone needs to see that there are consequences for this kind of behavior. Angela leaned forward, her tone deliberate. And what about her? Do you think she's capable of understanding the impact of what she's done? Chris's jaw tightened. Honestly, I don't know, but she's going to hear it anyway. She doesn't get to walk out of here thinking this is just a personal vendetta. She needs to know that her words and actions hurt people. Angela nodded slowly. Then make her see it. Call out her behavior. Make her face the reality of what she did, not just to me, but to this restaurant and the values it represents. Chris's eyes softened as he looked at his mother. You've taught me a lot about standing up for what's right. I just hope I can live up to it. Angela reached out, placing a hand on his arm. You already have, Chris, and this is one more step toward making sure this place reflects everything you've worked so hard to build. Chris smiled faintly, a spark of determination in his eyes. I'll make it happen. She'll have to face the truth before she goes. Angela stood, smoothing the front of her dress. Good. And while you're at it, remind everyone else why this restaurant is different. Make it clear that this isn't just about me. It's about setting a standard. Chris nodded, his resolve solidifying. I'll call the meeting as soon as the rush is over. She'll have to explain herself in front of everyone. And then she's out. Angela gave him a proud smile. Good. That's how you lead. With accountability and clarity. Chris exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Now, let me get you something to eat. You've had a long night, and I still owe you dinner. Angela chuckled softly, her laughter a balm to the tension in the room. I'll hold you to that. But don't think for a second that I'm done keeping an eye on you. Chris laughed, a genuine sound this time. I wouldn't expect anything less. The restaurant had quieted considerably as the dinner rush came to an end. Chris stood at the head of the dining room, his staff gathered before him. Angela sat off to the side, a composed observer. The air was thick with curiosity and tension. Word had spread that something significant was about to happen. Emily stood among the staff, her posture defensive and her eyes darting nervously. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, clearly bracing herself for whatever was coming. Chris cleared his throat, commanding the room's attention. Thank you all for staying late tonight, he began, his tone calm but firm. "I want to address something important that happened during tonight's service. It's something that goes against everything this restaurant stands for." The staff murmured quietly, glancing at one another. Emily's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Chris continued, "This restaurant was built on the idea that everyone deserves respect, no matter who they are. Whether they're a first-time diner or a regular, a CEO or a dishwasher, every person who walks through those doors should feel welcome here. And when that doesn't happen, we fail. Not just as individuals, but as a team." Angela watched as the words settled over the group. Some nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably. Emily's face hardened, her lips pressing into a thin line. Chris's gaze swept the room, landing on Emily. "Tonight, one of our customers was treated in a way that was unacceptable. She was ignored, disrespected, and spoken to in a manner that has no place in this restaurant or anywhere else." Emily's cheeks flushed, and she opened her mouth to speak, but Chris held up a hand to stop her. "Not yet. You'll have your chance." He turned to the rest of the staff. "I want to make something very clear. This isn't just about one mistake. Mistakes happen. We all know that. But how you handle those mistakes matters. Taking responsibility matters. Treating people with dignity matters." Chris paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "What happened tonight wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice. A choice to treat someone differently because of assumptions, biases, and personal attitudes that have no place here." Emily stepped forward slightly, her voice defensive. "I didn't mean for it to come out like that. I was stressed." And Chris cut her off, his voice steady. "It's not about what you meant. It's about what you did, and what you did hurt someone. Your words and actions weren't just rude. They were discriminatory." The room fell silent, the weight of Chris's words pressing down on everyone. Emily shifted uncomfortably, her arms tightening around herself. "I already said I was sorry," she muttered. "What else do you want from me?" Angela, who had remained quiet until now, finally spoke. "An apology means nothing if it's not followed by accountability." All eyes turned to her as she stood, her voice calm but commanding. "You can't just brush this off as stress or a bad day. You went out of your way to make me feel unwelcome, like I didn't belong here, and if you can't acknowledge that, then your apology is hollow." Emily's face burned, and she looked away, avoiding Angela's gaze. "I didn't mean it like that," she muttered again. Chris stepped forward, his tone firm but not unkind. "Then what did you mean, Emily? Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you made a lot of assumptions tonight. And those assumptions hurt someone." Emily opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked around the room, her defensiveness crumbling under the weight of the stares from her co-workers. She started, her voice faltering. "I didn't think it was a big deal. I mean, I guess I just assumed." Angela raised an eyebrow. "You assumed I wouldn't matter." Emily's head snapped up, her face pale. "No, I didn't mean that. But that's what your actions said." Angela interrupted, her voice sharp. "Whether you admit it or not, that's how you treated me, like I didn't matter. And that's the problem." Chris nodded, his expression unyielding. "And that's why you can't stay here, Emily. I've given you chances before, more than I probably should have. But this isn't just about me or my mother. It's about the values of this restaurant. And your actions tonight proved that you don't share those values." Emily's face crumpled, her voice rising in desperation. "You're firing me over this?" Chris's tone softened slightly, but his resolve remained firm. "I'm letting you go because this isn't the first time your attitude has been a problem. Tonight was just the breaking point. I can't have someone on my team who doesn't respect the people we serve, or the people they work with." Emily looked around, hoping for support from her co-workers, but the silence was deafening. She turned back to Chris, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for it to get this far, and yet it did," Chris said simply. "Now it's time to move forward." Emily's shoulders sagged as the reality of the situation sank in. She turned and walked toward the door without another word. The room remained silent until the door closed behind her. Chris turned back to his staff, his expression resolute. Let this be a reminder of what we stand for: respect, integrity, and accountability. If we can't uphold those values, we don't deserve to call ourselves a team. Angela watched as the staff slowly nodded in agreement, a sense of unity beginning to settle over the group. Chris met her eyes, and she gave him a small, proud smile. The restaurant had mostly cleared out by the time Chris returned to Angela's table. The hum of conversation and clinking plates was replaced with a peaceful quiet, broken only by the faint music playing overhead. Angela sat near the window, a steaming plate of salmon and vegetables before her, finally enjoying the meal she had waited so long for. Chris slid into the seat across from her, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "How's the food?" he asked, forcing a small smile. Angela placed her fork down carefully and met his gaze. "Delicious," she said warmly. "But more importantly, how are you?" Chris sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I'll be honest. I feel drained. That wasn't easy." "Firing someone never is, even when it's the right thing to do." Angela nodded knowingly. "It's never supposed to be easy, Chris. If it were, you wouldn't be doing it right." Chris gave a faint chuckle, running a hand through his hair. "I just hope the team understands why I had to do it." Angela took a sip of water before speaking, her tone thoughtful. "They do. I saw it in their faces during the meeting. They needed to hear you say those things about respect, accountability, and standing up for what's right. It's not just about Emily. It's about setting the tone for everyone." Chris leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "I hate that it had to get to this point, though. I can't help but wonder if I could have handled things differently earlier, before it escalated." Angela placed a comforting hand on his. "You can't change the past, Chris. What matters is how you move forward. You didn't just fire her. You showed your team, and everyone else, that this place is about more than just food. It's about values." Chris nodded slowly, his resolve strengthening. "I guess I just worry about what kind of impression it left on the customers who saw it." Angela smiled softly. "The customers who matter will see it for what it was, a moment of accountability. You didn't just let it slide, and that speaks volumes about your character and this restaurant's integrity." For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, the weight of the evening slowly lifting. Angela picked up her fork again, cutting into the perfectly cooked salmon. "You know," she began, a hint of humor creeping into her voice, "despite everything, this might be the best meal I've had in a long time." Chris laughed, the sound genuine and full of relief. "Well, it better be. I made sure the chef knew it had to be perfect." Angela chuckled softly, but her tone grew serious again. "You've built something special here, Chris. This restaurant isn't just a place to eat. It's a reflection of who you are. And tonight, you proved that it's not just about serving food, it's about serving people." Chris leaned back, a small smile playing on his lips. "You're right. That's exactly why I opened this place, to create something meaningful." Angela set her fork down, her gaze steady. "But it's also a reminder that these battles aren't over. Emily is just one person, but the attitudes she represents? They're everywhere, and the only way to combat them is by staying vigilant." Chris nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. "You're right. I can't let my guard down. This isn't just about protecting the restaurant's reputation. It's about protecting the people who come here." Angela's smile softened. "Exactly. And it's not just about calling out the bad behavior. It's about encouraging the good. The way you handled tonight, it set a precedent, not just for your staff, but for everyone who walked through those doors." Chris tilted his head, his expression thoughtful. "I just hope she takes something from it. I know she's gone, but I want her to walk away, understanding why what she did was wrong." Angela paused, her voice calm but firm. "You can't control whether she learns, Chris. That's on her. But you've done your part. You gave her the truth. The rest is up to her." Chris nodded again, his confidence renewed. "You're right. And from here on out, I'll make sure this place stays true to the vision we've built." Angela raised her glass of water, her eyes gleaming with pride. "To staying true to the vision." Chris smiled, lifting his own glass. "To the vision." They clinked glasses, the sound light and hopeful against the quiet backdrop of the restaurant. The evening had been long and challenging, but it had also been a turning point, a reminder of the power of standing up for what was right. As Angela savored her meal, she glanced around the now empty dining room, her heart full of pride. Her son had faced a difficult test tonight, and he had passed it with integrity. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she also knew that Chris was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The restaurant was alive with its usual hum of activity. A month had passed since that unforgettable night, and the establishment seemed to have only grown stronger in its wake. Chris had made sure of that. He had held firm on the standards he had outlined during the staff meeting, reinforcing the culture of respect and accountability that defined his vision. Angela had visited a few times since, each visit a reminder of the pride she felt in her son's resilience and leadership. Tonight, she sat at her usual table, sipping tea and enjoying the warm, welcoming atmosphere. Chris was making his rounds when he caught sight of a figure near the entrance. For a moment, he thought it was a new customer, but as he stepped closer, his stomach tightened. Emily stood there, clutching a small handbag, her posture stiff and uncertain. Gone was the defensive smirk. Her face was pale, and her eyes darted nervously around the room. Chris approached her, his expression unreadable. "Emily," he said, his tone calm but firm. "What are you doing here?" Emily straightened, trying to muster some of her old bravado, but it came off brittle and forced. I came to talk, if you have a minute." Chris studied her for a moment before nodding. "Let's step outside." He led her to the small patio near the side entrance, away from the customers and staff. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of nearby flowers. Emily hesitated before speaking, wringing her hands. "Look," she began, her voice shaky. "I know I messed up. I know what I did was wrong. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I just wanted to say I'm sorry." Chris's gaze remained steady, giving nothing away. "You said that the night I fired you." Emily flinched slightly but pressed on. "I mean it this time. I've been out of work since then, and it's been hard. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened, and I know I acted out of line. I let my frustrations get the better of me, and I said things I shouldn't have." Angela appeared on the patio, having quietly followed them outside. Her voice was calm but carried an edge of curiosity. "Emily, if you've been thinking so much about your actions, let me ask you something." Emily blinked, startled by Angela's presence. Sure." Angela stepped closer, her posture poised. "Why, of all people, would you say and believe the things you did while working for a black man? Did you think Chris wouldn't notice? Did you think it didn't matter?" Emily's face turned crimson. She looked down, fumbling for words. I didn't think about it like that. It wasn't about him." Angela tilted her head, her gaze unrelenting. "Then what was it about? Me? People who look like me? What made you think it was okay to treat me, or anyone, like that?" Emily's voice cracked under the weight of Angela's questions. "I don't know. I guess I was frustrated, and I didn't mean to." Angela's tone sharpened, though her voice remained calm. "Frustration doesn't make you a racist, Emily. It just shows what was already there." Emily swallowed hard, her hands trembling. "I grew up around people who thought like that, okay? It's not an excuse, but it's how I was raised. And I've never really, unlearned it." Angela's expression softened slightly but stayed firm. "Unlearning it starts with acknowledging it. But acknowledging it isn't enough. You have to decide to do better every single day. And tonight is a good night to start." Emily nodded slowly, her face crumpling. "I'm trying. I swear I'm trying." Angela studied her for a moment before stepping back. "Then keep trying, but not here. You've burned that bridge. It's up to you to rebuild it somewhere else." Chris finally spoke, his voice steady. "Emily, my mother's right. This isn't about us anymore. It's about you. And whether you take this lesson to heart is entirely up to you." Emily wiped at her eyes, her voice trembling. "I understand. Thank you for even letting me say this." Angela gave her a final nod, her voice gentler now. "Good luck, Emily. I hope you figure it out." Chris watched as Emily walked away. Her shoulders slumped. When she was gone, he turned to Angela. "Thanks for stepping in. You always know how to cut to the heart of things." Angela smiled faintly. "Sometimes people need to hear the truth. Whether they choose to listen is on them." Chris nodded. "I just hope she does." Angela looked at him with quiet pride. "And if she doesn't, at least she knows someone held her accountable. That alone is a step forward."